When you have the kind of experience and knowledge that even the most accomplished C-suite leaders need, you have Zoe Price, CEO of Resume Pilots, helping those looking for their next leadership challenge to get prepared and make differences. Also, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and support our show. Those links will be in the show notes. And share this interview with your colleagues. This is a Change Agent Podcast. Zoe, it's really nice having you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, no, I'm really excited to be here. And it's an exciting subject. Well, certainly for me anyway.
Yeah, I think it's for all of us as well. And I'm excited to learn so much from you. Well, to get us started, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and the impetus for starting Resume Pilots?
So Resume Pilots was started because the pattern was that the same thing kept coming up over and over again. Very smart and very capable people were doing everything that they told would lead to progression. So, they're working hard, being loyal, getting results. But what they were noticing was that their careers were stalling and in some cases going backwards, or what they were finding was if they'd been made redundant, it was very difficult to get back into the workplace. And so the frustration wasn't around these people's ability, incredibly competent, smart, great people, but the rules around hiring, the expectations around promotion had changed. And if that's not explained to you, if you're using an old playbook, not a new one, then that makes things difficult. And I think people were perhaps blaming themselves almost for situations that actually were much more systemic than they were down to them. So Resume Pilots was really created to bridge that gap, which helps people position themselves really strategically in a market that it still needs them, still wants them. Those more senior people still wants those people, but the market doesn't reward experience alone. It doesn't reward what you've done. It rewards visibility, timing, perception of value. It rewards how replicable your results are for them. So I think that's really why Resume Pilots came about. It was that need for people to not change who they were, not be better, but just to package and position themselves in a way that fits the market today, not what had fitted the market years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's changing too. I mean, as far as the way that we used to do things versus the way we're doing them now. Who are the leaders that you work with today? And why do they come to you if they've already accomplished so much? Because it seems like to me that if they've already done things, they would kind of know what they need to do.
So I think if we're talking about broadly the Gen X cohort, so people in their sort of the 40 to 55-year-old age bracket, which I absolutely am in the middle of, we've probably had a career that was reasonably easy to access the job market. So I think this is part of the perfect storm that we're in at the moment. Is we had an established playbook that worked. It worked well. We had a resume that was very much chronological. This is what I've done. This is what I've been responsible for. And it had always worked. How they found those jobs had always worked. You could use your network, you could use recruiters, you could apply on job boards, you could do those things and those would work. Your experience had a value that was in demand in the market. So these are people that are successful, particularly on paper. They're very successful. They've led teams, they've delivered results, they've navigated complexity, they've worked in all sorts of different environments. So different political environments, different economic environments, different environmental priorities. We've lived through all of that. And that had always been our advantage. Mm-hmm. So what brings people to me now is definitely not a lack of capability, but what they're noticing is a lack of traction. Particularly if people have been out of work through redundancy, they're finding it much more difficult to get into work. They're finding that that perhaps they're being overlooked for promotions when they know that they're ready, but what they haven't done is signal to the business that they're ready. And so
Mm-hmm.
there is a sense that decisions are being made around promotion, around selection, whether that's internal or external. Those decisions, the basis on which those decisions are made has shifted. So
Mm-hmm.
these people are performing, they're still bringing in the results, they're still very strong performers, individual performers, but the opportunities aren't opening up in the way that they had used to and the way that they would expect them to in the future.
Mm-hmm. Do you
So they're
think
not.
that's like sorry to interrupt, the way you're describing the almost passiveness of what we expect? We do good and we expect the return for that. And then, like, if I do well, I just know my boss will promote me. But is that a correct assessment that maybe people in the Gen X realm are a bit more passive in terms of career advancement?
Potentially, yes, because I think we've used the old playbook is if you do good work and you have been around for a while, then you will get that promotion. So I think that's that expectation. I think now what's happening is just as a general shift we have in every aspect, not just in careers, but in everything, we now have an expectation, a different expectation. Everything has got to be sensational. Everything has got to be instant gratification. I think perhaps there's, I was thinking about it in terms of succession planning. Succession planning is something that's long term. But business decisions now are being made in a really contracted time frame and getting more and more contracted. So when you think about, the way I used to describe it is that at the lower tiers of an organization, those people are working on this today, this week, maybe this month. And then you've got higher maybe managers and divisional managers who are working in this month to this quarter in their mind. And then you've got the C-suite who are working in this year to next year to 3 years down the road. Now I think all of those layers, they're all working in a contracted time frame because you've got to have result. Everything is changing. People's customers' expectations are changing. Marketing methods are changing. Everything is changing at such a rapid rate that those changes in expectation are happening in hiring and promotion as well. And I think where that Gen X generation had relied on an old playbook, that playbook now says, we don't really care what you did. What we care about now, particularly if you're looking at external, we don't necessarily care what you did. What we care about is those results that you achieved. Could you achieve them for us in our constraints, in our market, with all of our, that change in environment? Can you still produce those same results? And I think that Gen X is probably not very good. They haven't caught up emotionally, or they might know it intellectually, but emotionally they haven't caught up with the fact that your 10, 20, 30 years of working experience is now not being recognized in the same way that it was. And now what we're looking at is a different set of expectations, and we're not catching up as quickly with how to position ourselves, how to market ourselves. If we are not active, we may well be very au fait with AI, but if we're not advertising that on our resume, then by its absence, people will perceive that therefore you're not up to date with it. So I think it's about positioning. It's not about being better or being different. It's about positioning yourself in a different way. And I think perhaps the younger generation have grown up with that expectation more so than we have, and therefore we are emotionally catching up with that.
I've got 2 points. One that I wanted to chat about. One is about the challenge that we as leaders who are trying to get that promotion, maybe we're going to take a bit more active role in that. Maybe we want to switch roles completely. Maybe we want to get back into the workforce completely, as you said, after redundancy. There may be a challenge there. What would be one of the most common challenges that you see leaders facing when they want to do that? In terms of common challenges, when you work with these leaders that are trying to get back into this thing and do these new roles or get a promotion, what do you see as like their most common challenge across the board?
Yeah, so I think it's probably twofold. The first is that positioning. the shift in particularly if we're talking about external roles, because I think these days most people's promotional opportunities come from an external move rather than an internal move for a variety of reasons. But if we focus on that as being the main example for which to put this into context, the shifts in the marketplace, one of the fundamental biggest shifts has been for organizations now to stop using external recruiters in the way that they used to. But what they are doing instead is building an internal talent acquisition team. And those teams have a very, very different remit to an external recruiter. They are looking for risk reduction and looking for finding somebody who has the skill set to solve a very specific business problem at that moment. So they're not specialists in each of the areas. If you think about a really large organization, they're not going to be specialists in all of the different departments. They're going to be very generalist in terms of finding talent. So they need to do, for somebody who's not a specialist, they need to understand what value you bring. What is it that you're known for? What do you deliver? You can't expect them to be decoding your value that a hiring manager might be able to do, but doesn't also have the time. You can't expect a generalist recruiter to decode your value in a resume that is just written in an old style, which is more chronological. This is where I was. This is what I did. This is what I was responsible for. It's got to be about the judgment that you made. How did you deliver those results? What were the constraints? What were the trade-offs? What's your story? What's your real tangible value? And can that be replicated elsewhere? So I think that's one of the things that we have to understand. And in that new environment, the biggest thing is to have your LinkedIn profile optimized. Because if you don't have that optimized with all of the right keywords in the right places, you're not going to get found by those new internal recruitment teams. And they hold the key to unlocking a large proportion of the 75% of the market that's not visible. So if you think about the market, 25% is what's visible on job boards, predominantly on job boards. 75% is there, but it's not actively marketed. It's controlled by your network, your reputation, your what you're known for, your results, and those internal recruitment teams, because they won't advertise roles. They'll just look for people that they think fit the bill and invite you to interview, invite you to be part of that conversation. These are not people, and they're not looking for people who are actively looking for roles. They're just looking for people who fit their remit. But they're not specialists, they're generalists. And so you need to be able to have that signal out there that says, I am somebody who could fit your bill. So that LinkedIn profile is incredibly important. You've got to be found. Then you've got your resume, which is your evidence document. Quite often I have people come to me saying, oh, I've spent the last 3 months tailoring my resume to every single application. Well, that was a waste of your time, because how many interviews came out of that? And often it's not even any feedback of any description. So, and a lot of that is because that 25%, that if you're using job boards and applying on job boards, those are brilliant at harvesting data. They're not brilliant at finding a role. So what you need to do is switch to this unlocking that 75%, which is done through having a LinkedIn optimized. Then you anchor your resume saying, this is what I do. This is my evidence document. This is my story. This is what I'm known for. This is my value. This is my leadership thesis. This is how I can replicate the value that I delivered for this company to you. That's your leadership thesis. That's your document, your anchor document. And then you've got a cover letter, which is the context with which you then deliver your resume to that particular organization in that particular role. That's what I always recommend for clients to do, because that sequence is the new playbook. If you're not using that sequence, you are either restricted to that 25%, which is hugely oversubscribed, and often not always an actual job. And so that 75% can't access you, you can't access it if all you're doing is using job boards. So those are the three key elements that I say to people. You don't need to be better. What you need to do is change your strategy for finding roles, because that's where you're going to get your success. And getting people to understand that, which is a very different playbook to the one that we've been used to, is probably the greatest challenge.
Do you find that some of the clients just aren't comfortable in LinkedIn?
Yes, I think they're not using it. They're not using it perhaps in the way that it's intended. They're not using it regularly because with all social media platforms, there's an algorithm that sits behind it.
Yeah.
If you are not positioned really clearly, then you're not going to be found as easily. If you're not using the platform regularly, then you're not on the radar of those people that are looking for new talent. If you are not using it, you're not connecting with people that could open up opportunities for you. And so one of the big things is I don't have time for you. I don't know how to use it. I don't know what it's all about. Oh, I've got an account, but I don't really use it. You're missing out on opportunities coming to you. And it might be that even if you're actually not actively job searching, you're happy where you are, but it's always a good idea to make sure that you're optimized for opportunities to come to you, because building that network, building that visibility, we don't know when redundancies are going to come. And I do have regular conversations with people who say, I never saw it coming. I've been made redundant. It's such a shock. I now don't know what to do.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you did provide in terms of ingredients for us to be successful as we move and transition these things in. But there are a lot of things that we don't know. And what do you find surprising that those that are looking for their next challenge may not be prepared for besides LinkedIn?
Yeah,
seems like to me there'd be some challenges there for them.
I think there's a few things. And when we touched earlier about you being now interviewed by people who are younger than you. And I think as the Gen X generation, it's very conceivable that that's going to happen more and more. Now, that's not a problem in and of itself if you can understand, as let's take the sort of the higher end of that age bracket. If you're in your 50 to 55 age range and you're being interviewed by somebody who's in their 30s, the thing that you need to understand about that person is if they're in their 30s, they haven't lived through as much in terms of those contextual changes, political changes, economic changes. They haven't lived through that so much. But what they have to, they are stronger in terms of digital native. And so what is required from somebody who's at that age bracket is to be able to demonstrate, articulate, codify their value to somebody whose lived experience is very different to theirs. You need to talk about transformation. You need to talk about optimization. You need to talk about technology, including AI. And if you're not, because you haven't necessarily done that in the past and that's always worked, we're talking about this old playbook. If you are not using that language, I think there is a perception, perhaps of somebody who's younger, that somebody who's older won't be able to get to grips as quickly with it, won't be able to get the speed of work, won't get the how technology optimizes processes, etc. Now, that's not true necessarily, but it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's perception, and you must deal with that perception, and you must get on the front foot with it to say, no, you're right. When I started my role in 1982, we didn't have email, let alone AI. But that doesn't mean that I've been left behind. What it means is that I've got the context of all my experience. Because when you're talking about transformations, I always use the analogy, if you pull the lever over here, what happens over here? Now, that might be something that perhaps somebody younger just pulls on one lever without necessarily seeing the patterns or the unintended consequences, the context behind that. I think we have a customer first focus. What's going to happen right the way down the line? I might not be somebody who's customer facing in my job, but somebody is, and I can understand that more perhaps because it's further away from me, but I can understand that more because of my experience over those decades. So I think there is real tangible value to all of that experience, but you have to be able to translate that in a way that is valuable and understandable. It is already codified to somebody who's much younger and lived a very different experience.
The threads that you're pulling on align so well with this question that pops up is, as we're talking about the Gen X moving into a new role, or they're trying to integrate into an organization where there's already the existence of a Gen Z or someone younger than them in a role in which may influence how well they do in that organization or whether they even get in there. What about the scenarios when the Gen X are already in there and they decide that they're going to leave, and the workforce now has to deal with this concept of, oh, I'm losing the experience. And what do you think the consequences are for the organization itself and how they mitigate those things?
So I do think it's damaging. I think if an entire generation falls out of the workforce through choice, through being forced, I think we are losing institutional knowledge. We're losing judgment. We're losing that leadership maturity. We are losing the context of, if you've been through 4 or 5 political cycles, you start to see patterns, you start to see the unintended consequences, and you can foresee those, which somebody who's younger may find not as easy to spot.
Mm-hmm.
I think, therefore, what happens then is businesses lose stability. We lose that mentorship at a time when I would believe that the younger generation need it most. And it's not just mentorship around work, it's mentorship in life. And I think it has the potential to send a dangerous message to that younger generation as well. Particularly if you're looking at people, if there's a clear pattern of older people being pushed out on the basis of perhaps they're more expensive, and so let's get some cheaper labour force in. I think that sends that message that loyalty doesn't pay off, that your experience and your value has a shelf life, and that perhaps working is something that you just have to get on with rather than that you really invest in. And I think that that's going to then erode trust in organisations long term. The interesting thing, and this is a little bit of a thought that's just playing around in the back of my mind, it's not something that I think is fully formed yet, but I do think that maybe we are on the cusp of, and I use that a rip in the space-time continuum very glibly, but maybe we are facing something. If you think way back, we had the agricultural revolution, and that made the world look very different. And then we moved from that to the industrial revolution, and that made the world look very different. Now we're moving to the digital revolution, and that's making things look very different. So, is there something about the rule book is being ripped up anyway? So is it therefore that actually that younger generation have the advantage where we don't? At the same time, I think organisations, particularly large organisations, have not woken up to that. If you think about really large organisations buying up very, very small little agile businesses, they are now at pains to keep that very young, very agile business out of the cumbersome, weighed down large organisation, because you were buying agility, and the moment that you integrate it into the main business, you lose that agility. So I think large organisations are not necessarily at the forefront of, if there is a rip up of the rule book, they're not going to be the ones leading that charge anyway. So those people that are in those organisations, if they're seeing that Gen X population falling out, that will have, I believe, a damaging impact on that younger workforce. You know, when organizations think that they can replace somebody who's older with somebody younger and cheaper, just think about it. It comes back to this unintended consequences. That person who has a lower salary has a lower salary because they haven't spent years gaining reams and reams of experience, of judgment, of leadership maturity, of institutional knowledge. There
Yeah.
is a bear trap that I think we're walking into, which says that older generation, we don't need you anymore. And then what happens with that is we end up with big gaps. You know,
Yeah.
you have a military background. My husband has a military background, and he said in the UK military, there was I think it was in the 90s, they had a drawdown of the size of the military, and they removed a middle section out of the military organizations. And 10 years later, hugely suffered for it. Because that mentorship had gone, recruitment at the lower levels slowed down, and suddenly you've got less people to push into those promotional places. Those promotional places, the people that were in there have gone. There were big alarming gaps, and I think that very similar look and feel of some bigger organizations could happen when you push people out at the top and you don't have the length of tenure at the bottom for your succession planning. You don't have that. You're not thinking long term, so you're not investing in that succession planning. It feels like the perfect storm brewing.
Yeah. That experience that people have inside the organizations is extremely important, because you can hire someone cheaper. You can hire someone with less years of experience, but the amount of money I feel like you would have to spend to get that value where you've had it is going to be probably more than what you've got. What do you think about that?
So I think it's really interesting. If you go to a lawyer and you have a contract drawn up, that contract might cost you thousands of pounds or dollars. It's not the physical paper that you're paying for. It's not even the words on the paper that you're paying for. What you're paying for is the years of experience that lawyer will have in getting to the point where they can build a contract that protects you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you go to the dentist, you pay for treatment. You might think, well, that only took 15 minutes. That's a huge amount of money for 15 minutes. What you're paying for is all that experience. When
Mm-hmm.
you have your bathroom refitted, you're paying labor, but what you're paying for is the years of experience that says that I will do this, I will craft, I've got craftsmanship qualities that mean that everything is done beautifully and will last a long time. And I think that's the bit that maybe businesses are not grasping in the same way. Yes, you can have somebody who's just out of university who earns considerably less than somebody who's in their 40s and 50s. But what you're buying is that experience, and you're right. We've talked about it. The experience is not valued in the same way. It should be, but it's not being valued in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're doing is buying those years of experience that say, I will get it right. I will understand the consequences. I will be able to predict the patterns. I will be able to spot the issues that could be coming down the road. I've got leadership maturity, which says I can manage people in a really productive way. And I do think that businesses that don't grasp that run the risk of that. Yes, we talked about that. It's that stability. As a business, as an organization grows, if you're a startup and you're very agile and you're very new, you can afford to make mistakes and experiment in a way that a larger organization perhaps doesn't anymore. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing then is looking for that stability, and that stability is going to come from diversity in your team. And that's gender diversity, that's age diversity, it's experience diversity. If you don't have that diversity, you are making things less stable than they would be otherwise. I think the younger generation, even if they might not admit it, they are looking for mentorship. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for a bit of reassurance. If I do this, is this going to blow up in my face? I don't, I'm worried that if something blows up in my face, whereas we've been around the block, we've got some battle scars, things blow up in our face, they blow up in our face. Somebody who's much younger might be more worried about that. So I think that there's a multitude of reasons why that older generation are really beneficial for an organization. But it comes back down to our generation positioning ourselves and being really smart about how we position ourselves, because we need to make younger people see that value when perhaps they don't understand it fully themselves.
Yeah. You touched on this topic. I want to go to this one, which is hiring outside the organization. You kind of touched about this on the beginning. And I found that an interesting concept is that in several occasions, at least in my personal experience with roles that I've held, companies hire executives from outside the organization rather than trying to get them promoted. It doesn't mean I haven't seen that happen. I have seen people that have risen through the ranks and they've made senior VP and everything's going great, and they're really good at what they do. But they also hire senior executives from outside when you thought someone from inside would have been a perfect fit for that particular role. Why do companies tend to do that? I mean, I sent in some notes to you before we started that I see the strategy in this, especially if it's a competitive company. Like if you're a defense contractor and you want to grab a very strategic hire from another company and you pull them over to obviously give yourself an edge. I understand that strategy, but the problem is that in the company that I'm currently in, I see a lot of people questioning that motive, and they have said, well, it looks like the predetermined route for me is that I'll get to a specific level, and after that I have to go outside or be picked up from another organization to go and get promoted. It just seems strange to me. Can you explain it?
So I think part of it is we have this notion that an external hire is somehow safer. I think external hires, as you alluded to, have borrowed credibility. So there's the previous titles, there's competitor logos, there is competitor knowledge, and there's an illusion perhaps of fresh thinking. I think the other side of that is that I don't think succession planning is done well, and talked about this earlier, where succession planning is a long-term activity. It's a long-term investment. You need to make sure that you recruit the right people at the bottom, that you invest and develop them, that you give them stretch projects that will enable them to showcase their potential, that you monitor that your book of potential new senior C-suite. You monitor them, you mentor them, you grow them, you develop them, you invest in them. I don't think that's done very well, and I think that probably comes down to, again, this contracted timescales. If you've got a C-suite that has a churn of between 18 months and 2 years, which is quite common, they are going to be focused on what's the maximum salary that I can get out of this role, what's the bonuses, what's the impact that I can make. Because once I've done that, and I probably spend 18 months, 2 years doing that, I'll then move on to the next one. So there's a lack of long-term thinking in that leadership level. There is churn at the bottom where people get fed up. They don't think that they can get promoted in the time frame that they are looking for, so they go externally, and that gives you a sense of putting yourself in control of your own career. But I think a lot of it is this illusion of borrowed credibility. I don't know if it's right, but it feels perhaps slightly lower risk in some respects, because they've done all the things that elsewhere that you're looking for somebody to have done. And then they come in with fresh thinking, with previous titles, with this credibility. But actually, the downside of that is the signals that sends to those people that are looking for that promotion, whether it's internal or external, they're still looking for that promotion. And what that tells the internal talent is, in order for you to get where you need to be, you're going to have to be picked up elsewhere rather than internally. And I think over time that creates disengagement. I think it encourages short-term thinking.
Yep.
And of course, you end up with a loss of institutional knowledge. You've got talent leak. And it costs a lot of money. When you think about those people that are in that talent pool, if they leave with their institutional knowledge, they leave with those relationships. You then have to buy somebody in. If you're using external recruiters, that costs money, but it also costs in terms of lack of productivity while you're replacing that person, the new person taking time to get up to speed. There's a cost, and I think it's a hidden cost. We think about cost of employees as being salary, but it's more than that. And you're losing that, or it's costing the business that amount of money every time somebody leaves. But if you've got short-term thinking at the top, it perpetuates the short-term thinking at the bottom. And then you end up with a vicious cycle of just basing decisions on short term. But I think that comes back down to what we talked about earlier with the velocity of change. I think companies are having to think much more short term. And that leads then into this whole ripping up of the rule book. Is there going to be a move away from permanent hires? Is fractional, is interim, is project-based, is that going to become a new landscape? And if that is, how do people like ourselves fit into that? How, can we accept that we might not be taken on full-time, we might not be taken on permanent, we might not be taken on for the long term, theoretically, because we're actually just going to be working on this short-term project? What are the unintended consequences from a business perspective? Because they're going to, if they adopt that model, you've got a constant flow and flux of people coming in and out. What does that do to your organizational stability? So there's lots of interesting questions coming out of this speed of velocity. Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing? I guess time will tell.
Seems like to me the strategic vision for a company is going to be really at risk if they can't afford to, or they choose to go that route, right? They say, we're going to do something a bit more temporal, and how do you develop a strategic vision for the company off of that? You spend time getting people's trust. You spend time getting them to deliver innovative ideas on how to solve things. And you went out for the short-term superficial fix that you thought was going to give you the edge to win a contract, and you lost it. But in terms of, hopefully we got time for one more question. When someone is trying to break into this realm where we're trying to get into an executive management role and they're trying to be ready, do you have any advice on what those who are looking to break into that executive management realm might do to be ready?
So I think if you're moving from what I deem as underneath the C-suite into the C-suite, that's the example that we'll use. It might not be as straightforward as that, but moving from the management and the day-to-day delivery, the execution, to the C-suite where it's much more strategy, I think that's a real mindset shift. And I think that's something that not everybody is comfortable with, or it may be that it takes some time for people to become comfortable with it. Because when you are used to delivering, if you're an individual contributor and you're used to delivering, and perhaps you're used to firefighting, and you do solutions, you fix problems, you work at a fast pace. You move up into that C-suite, and then it becomes more strategic. You are looking at where the directions are. You're looking at optimizing systems. It's a very different mindset of what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think if you are somebody who is looking to make that move, you need to understand, you need to be mentored, I think, in if you are in that leadership role and you get sucked into firefighting, then you might as well have stayed where you were, because you're not going to achieve what you need to achieve at that level. So it's a different expectation of what you deliver. It's a different expectation of how you work. And I think you need to understand that and make that shift really intentionally. Because if you don't make that shift intentionally, you end up in the C-suite doing lower value work and then not delivering what you were expected to of somebody in the C-suite. So I think you really need to be very clear about what those expectations are going to be and how you're going to work day to day in that. Because if you don't, you end up not performing the role that you have gone into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's what happens when you have these really good recommendations, when everything seems like it's just the right answer. There can be no way that your client would negate those in any way, but they do. There's a point where it's okay for you not to take heed to everything I recommend to you as your consultant. But there's a point at which, if a client says, hey, Zoe, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to do those things. What is your response to that? How do you get people to refocus on what really matters?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the analogy that I would use is, and I have never been on the back of a motorbike in any great quantity. I think I've done it a couple of times. Intellectually, I know that if you go around a corner on a motorbike, you have to lean with the bike. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you are actually at greater risk of the motorbike falling over. But I can't do it because I have this terrible fear of falling. I can't lean with it because, to me, that means we're going to fall over. Mm-hmm. I think it's very similar for some people, that they understand what I'm saying intellectually, but emotionally, but what I've always done has worked for me right up until now. So if what I've done has worked, why would I suddenly do something different? Mm-hmm. Because if I do something different, how do I know that's going to work? Mm-hmm. I've got familiarity. I've got confidence in what I used to do and that it worked. And now you're telling me to do something really quite different. And I just don't know in my own heart that it's going to work. We keep bees. And when we first went to study bees, the beekeepers would say, don't worry, the bees can't get in your suit. Well, until you know that because you've done it, it's all very well taking somebody else's word for it, but you have to do it to really have the confidence that that is right, that the bees aren't going to get in. So,
yeah, I certainly would be nervous.
Yeah, and to begin with, you are. Then it becomes easy because you have confidence in your kit. So this is the thing: is people have got confidence in what we're saying, and that it's not a change so much that they have to become completely different people, but what they have to do is package it up differently and do their job search in a different way. Once they've got that emotionally, then fine. But I'm not there to tell people that they must do something. What I'm saying is, I know from all this experience and from the conversations that I have, the people that use the new playbook are successful. And the people that don't use the new playbook come back to me. Mm-hmm. So therefore, what they were doing doesn't work anymore. But I think some people catch up with it emotionally. It takes longer than, some people can do intellectually and emotionally at the same time, and some people don't. And that's fine, because I know I've given them the right information. I know that the old playbook does not work anymore. We've had the land of milk and honey, and it's gone now. We have to change how we do things. And so those people, and it's about guidance, it's about credibility, it's about confidence. And if somebody doesn't take our advice straight away, then they'll circle back to us, or they maybe go to somewhere else. But whatever they do is entirely up to them. But the facts are that the system has changed. The old playbook does not work anymore. And if you really do want to get back into work or get a promotion or get a new job, you are going to have to present yourself in a different way. It's not about being better or different. It's just about packaging yourself in a new world way.
Yeah, we have to adapt and trust the process too. And I think listeners, as they hear us conversing about this particular question, I'm sure they're probably like, oh, if you didn't want the advice and you didn't want to have someone tell you what you should be doing, you shouldn't have paid for them to come and give you that advice. Why would you want to ask a question you don't want the answer for, which I've seen too often. So I'm going to close it here. Thank you so much, Zoe, for joining me. Hopefully we'll be able to have you back on the show. There's so much more to talk about because 45 minutes is not enough for me to get all of my questions asked, but it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so very much for coming, and I hope you take good care of yourself, and thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's been a really enjoyable conversation, and you're right, there's so much more about careers that we want to talk about, but yeah, time is up. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to explain that actually the playbook has changed, and whatever you do with that information, it is positive.